Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really provocative essay by the Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho, and asks a question that's, well, it's deeply unsettling. How can the pursuit of good, with the best of intentions, lead to absolute horror? So the author kicks things off with a pretty jarring paradox. He brings up a case involving PETA, the organization that's all about the ethical treatment of animals. But he points to these accusations that its employees were caught dumping the bodies of literally thousands of animals they had promised to save. And then he just scales that paradox way up to a staggering historical tragedy. He talks about the 3 million civilians who were killed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Now, in the author's view, this regime's rise to power was actually helped along by a widespread peace movement that pushed the U.S. to pull out of the region, which, in his view, left this devastating power vacuum. You see, these two examples lead right to the central question that drives this entire essay. What is the mechanism, the psychological or philosophical switch that lets people commit evil acts in the name of doing good? To get to that answer, the author first makes a claim that is, to put it mildly, very controversial. To find the answer, Carvalho draws this really stark and, highly controversial dividing line right through intellectual history. He says there's a fundamental moral difference between two major camps of thinkers, and he argues that this is the absolute key to understanding the whole problem. So on one side, you've got what he calls the left-wing pantheon. According to Carvalho, influential thinkers like Rousseau, Marx, Sartre, and Chomsky were, almost to a man, individuals of what he calls low moral character. And he backs this up by pointing to a whole list of alleged personal failings, everything from sadism to obsessive lying. And then, in direct contrast, Carvalho asserts that their conservative and, his word, reactionary counterparts, we're talking figures like Edmund Burke, Alexis de Tocqueville, and Blaise Pascal, were, in his estimation, almost always people of high personal morality and real intellectual honesty. Yet Carvalho's conclusion from all this is, it's blunt, it's absolute. He's claiming there's a fundamental moral imbalance between these two groups, and he believes that imbalance is baked right into their ideas and ultimately their real-world impact. But that just raises a huge question, right? If this moral divide he sees is real, how did the ideas from people he considers so flawed become so incredibly influential? Well, the author says the root cause isn't really about politics at all. No, he traces it to something much deeper. A profound shift in how Western civilization even understands time and history itself. Let's unpack how he builds this argument. He starts way back with the classical Christian view, the one articulated by St. Augustine. In this way of thinking, history is split into two cities. You have the earthly city, which is chaotic, messy. It doesn't really have any ultimate meaning on its own. True justice, true purpose, that's all found in the spiritual city of God, which exists outside of human time, something that comes after the final judgment. But Carvalho argues, starting around the 14th century, something began to change. Messianic movements started to reject this idea. They got impatient. They wanted to drag the kingdom of heaven down to earth, to build it right here, right now, by force. And he claims this impulse just grew over the centuries, eventually fueling revolutionary ideologies that promise to create a perfect utopia in the future. And this right here really illustrates the core mutation he's talking about. The very source of meaning and justice shifts from a timeless spiritual eternity to a perfect, achievable moment in the future, a kind of worldly paradise that's supposed to be built by human action. This hypnotic goal of a perfect future is what the author calls the perpetual instant. He defines it as this impossible dream of freezing a utopian moment in time and just making it last forever. It's a concept, he argues, that has totally replaced the traditional understanding of eternity in the modern mind. Okay, so how does this pretty abstract philosophical idea connect back to actual real-world violence? Well, according to the author, this shift in how we think about history completely rewrites our entire moral code. It creates this really dangerous new kind of moral logic. See, when a hypothetical future society becomes the ultimate absolute good, then anything or anyone that stands in its way automatically becomes absolute evil. And here's the crucial part. Any action, no matter how horrific it is right now, can be justified as just a necessary step to achieve that future good. And what's really fascinating here is the tragic irony at the heart of this logic. Because the future, well, by its very definition, it never actually arrives, right? It's always just over the horizon. So this way of thinking basically grants a permanent, unending license for oppression, cruelty, and killing, all in the name of an impossible goal that you can never actually reach. And this brings us to the author's final and pretty chilling conclusion, the very concept that gives this essay its name. In his analysis, the entire moral landscape gets turned completely upside down. Good is no longer about your actions today, it's about your allegiance to some theoretical future society. Sin is no longer a personal failing, it's the act of opposing the march toward that utopia. And judgment? It's not passed by God, but by the winners of history, who get to define what that future looks like. He argues this psychological mechanism, this worship of a future that automatically forgives any present crime, is the powerful, almost religious authority that allows well-meaning people to commit, or at the very least support, truly evil acts in the sincere belief that they are serving a higher good. Ultimately, Carvalho's essay leaves us with a really provocative question that gets to the very core of his argument. What happens when our vision of a perfect future becomes the ultimate justification for our actions in the present?